And with those still in captivity, we look back at the darkest day in Israel's history that shook the region and the world.
Can be located from anywhere with you just need a good connectivity, internet connection.
The train rolled across the desert plains, its carriages filled with soldiers on leave, merchants heading toward Tel Aviv, and families returning from short trips to the southern towns. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the steel tracks was a familiar song, one that lulled many into a sense of routine. Nobody suspected that just beyond the horizon, men were waiting, watching, calculating every movement, preparing for a strike that would turn an ordinary afternoon into chaos.
And 1 year ago, on October 7th, Hamas launched the biggest ever terror attack on Israel. The Palestinian organization stormed through this.
From the ridge above the tracks, the whir of small drones blended with the hot wind. Their cameras swept across the railway, feeding images to men crouched in dusty gullies below. These were not ordinary scouts. They were trained, prepared, and fueled by a mission to hit the train, sow fear, and prove that the battlefield was no longer confined to Gaza's borders. With motorcycles lined up behind a dune, the militants waited for the signal. The buzzing machines circled low, disguised almost as toys, but each carried a payload meant to destroy. The attack began with the sudden hum of engines. Motorcycles shot forward, tearing down the slopes toward the tracks, their riders masked, armed with rifles slung tight across their shoulders. Passengers inside the train barely noticed at first. A child pressed her face to the window, pointing at the streaks of movement outside, mistaking them for a desert race. Then the sound changed, louder, sharper, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Windows shattered, alarms wailed, and the train lurched as its driver slammed the brakes. Above, the drones tilted downward, releasing small explosives that burst against the roof of the front carriage. The impact shook the entire train. Smoke poured from the vents as passengers screamed and ducked for cover. The motorcycles swarmed the halted machine, circling like predators around prey. Some fired into the air to terrify the passengers further, while others pressed closer, preparing to board.
7,500 and took at least 250 people hostage. 1 year later, as people around the world pay tribute to those killed in the attack
For those inside, it was a nightmare come alive. Glass raining down, bullets ricocheting off steel, the deafening roar of engines just meters away. But what the attackers had not anticipated was how quickly Israel would respond. Just minutes after the first drone detonated, radar and surveillance systems picked up the unusual signals. In the distance, the faint thud of artillery fire carried through the desert air, followed by the roar of fighter jets breaking across the horizon. The militants glanced upward, realizing too late that they were no longer hunters but targets. The retaliation was swift and merciless. Jets screamed overhead, releasing precision-guided bombs that tore into the dunes where backup fighters had hidden. Plumes of fire and sand erupted, turning the once quiet desert into a storm of debris. Armored vehicles rumbled from nearby bases, their turrets swiveling toward the motorcycles now scattering across the plain.
And with those still in captivity, we look back at the darkest day in Israel's history that shook the region and the world.
Gunships hovered low, spitting streams of fire that ripped the earth apart in glowing arcs. On the ground, passengers inside the train watched in stunned disbelief. What moments before had been terror was now a surreal display of power. Through the shattered windows, they saw motorcycles veer off, colliding into one another in frantic attempts to escape. Drones that once hovered with menace were shredded mid-air by Israeli counter-drones and bursts of anti-air fire. The militants fought to resist, firing blindly toward the incoming forces, but the balance had already shifted.
Can be located from anywhere with you just need a good connectivity, internet connection.
One militant managed to leap onto the rear carriage, firing wildly into the air. He tried to drag a hostage from the train, but before he could, a crack from a sniper's rifle echoed across the desert. The man fell limp, rolling off the edge of the platform. Others tried to plant explosives against the tracks, desperate to salvage the mission, but armored jeeps crushed their attempts. The battlefield that had begun as a bold ambush now resembled a massacre. Inside the train, fear gave way to shock. Families clutched one another, not yet processing their survival. Soldiers off duty found themselves instinctively helping the wounded, tearing strips of clothing into bandages, guiding civilians towards safer compartments. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the acrid stench of explosives lingering long after the last drone had been swatted from the sky. Then silence. It came almost suddenly, like a curtain dropping on a play. The gunfire tapered. The motorcycles lay twisted and burning across the desert floor, and the sky cleared of smoke trails. What remained was devastation, bodies strewn across the sand, blackened craters pockmarking the ground, and the twisted steel of drone fragments glinting under the relentless sun. Israel's retaliation had not only crushed the ambush, but had done so with such overwhelming force that even survivors struggled to comprehend it. Within hours, footage began to spread across global networks, images of jets tearing through the skies, of armored divisions racing along the tracks, of passengers let out trembling but alive. Analysts on every channel called it a message, a display meant not just for Hamas but for any who considered replicating the attack. And yet beneath the triumph, there lingered unease. The passengers who lived through it would never forget the suddenness of the assault, the way motorcycles appeared from nowhere, the mechanical hum of drones lowering from the sky. For them, safety would never again feel like a guarantee. They had seen how fragile routine could be, how quickly the ordinary could collapse into chaos. For the militants who planned the ambush, the failure was catastrophic. Intelligence later revealed that the attack had been weeks in preparation, meant as a symbol that no part of Israel was beyond reach. But the retaliation turned it into a cautionary tale, a demonstration of overwhelming firepower and rapid coordination. What was supposed to be a message of defiance had instead become a reminder of vulnerability. Yet stories began to emerge, whispers from survivors, fragments of accounts pieced together in hushed tones. Some claim that one drone had nearly breached the driver's cabin, a strike that could have derailed the entire train and killed hundreds. Others recalled seeing militants drop their weapons mid-attack, fleeing in panic when the sky thundered with jet engines. Children spoke of hiding under seats, clutching stuffed toys, their ears ringing from explosions. For Israel, the retaliation would be studied, celebrated, and criticized. Some saw it as necessary, a decisive strike that prevented greater bloodshed. Others questioned the sheer scale, noting that the counterattack left the desert littered with bodies, a scene more reminiscent of war than defense. But for those who had been on the train, debates mattered little. To them, the only truth was survival, the only memory that of glass, fire, and a sky split open by vengeance. In the aftermath, the train was pulled slowly toward a nearby base, its carriages battered but intact. Engineers inspected the tracks for damage, soldiers guarded the perimeter, and medics ferried the injured to waiting helicopters. The passengers disembarked one by one, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Some limped, others stumbled in shock, a few carried on stretchers, yet all were alive. Night fell, and the desert cooled. Fires still smoldered in the distance, glowing like embers across the dunes. The wreckage of motorcycles and drones lay scattered, silent reminders of the day's violence. And in that quiet, a strange truth settled over those who had witnessed it. That in a world of machines and firepower, survival often hinged not on preparation or caution, but on the thin, unpredictable line between attack and retaliation. The story of the ambush would echo for years, told and retold by survivors, dissected by generals, twisted by propagandists. But for those inside the train, it would never be a tale of victory or defeat. It would remain forever, the moment when ordinary life shattered into fragments of glass and smoke, and when survival depended on forces far beyond their control.